So you said today you're speaking on the glorious future with a question mark.
With a question mark.
Of the future of the meat industry.
Yeah,
What are some of your thoughts?
Well, as I say, I've spent weeks of the year wandering around the globe talking remorselessly, but often at conferences. And I mean, there's a sort of prevailing wisdom is that if you're in the meat industry, that over the next 20, 30 years, as the population of the world increases, as incomes in emerging countries go up, as their diets change to take into account more protein, that it has to, almost by definition, be a glorious time for the meat industries of the world. So you've got this sort of everything going upwards and heading north with prices looking good. So just sit back and relax and enjoy yourself. My view is that is never, ever the case.
Things are never that easy.
You know, they're never that easy, and that what's likely to happen is what's happened over the last, 3, 4, 5 years is extraordinary volatility. No doubt higher prices, but also higher input prices, whether that be oil prices, whether that be feed grain prices, and it's going to be tough. And what's more, particularly for this conference, if I look at, we're talking red meat here, we're talking beef specifically, then that's the highest price meat. That's the premium meat.
Yeah.
And so constantly, I think the challenge will be in the beef industry globally is to explain to consumers why they should pay twice as much for beef as they do for the next species down, which is pork.
Well, especially with the global economy, you know, how it's been covered, it's not rosy in some areas of the world.
You know, but we'll get through that, you know. And so there are two elements to this. I mean, I talk about developed countries, where I think in developed countries, typically what's happening, we're getting aging. What happens as you get older, I'm the very manifestation of that. I'm 63, coming 64.
Pretty good shape.
Yeah, no, not bad shape. That you eat less. And what do you eat less of? Well, in particular, meat. So I'd expect to see in Canada, in the US, in Europe, in Russia perhaps, in Australia and New Zealand, to see per capita consumption of meats in general to be static or decline. Probably decline. Actually, that was picked up by one of the speakers, Charlie Gracie, today. So that's not that rosy, if you will, in developed countries. Well, what about emerging countries? Well, there it depends. And it depends on what happens economically over the next 5 or 10 years. If there is accelerated food price inflation, then I think there's something of a problem here. If you take, in Canada, for example, what's our expenditure on food as a proportion of income? About 10%, let's say. What is it in the Philippines? It's 50%. Okay, half your income goes on food. So what happens if the price of a staple like rice doubles, which it may well do over the next 5, 10 years? In the Philippines, how much money will they have left to go nipping out to buy more meat? Not much, I suggest. So I'm saying, hey, I really do take a robust long-term view of the meat industry, but it is, we'll get there, and we'll get to a higher price plateau, and we'll see good times, but hang on to your hats and make sure they're crash hats, because it's going to be volatile and it's going to be tough, and you better be good at managing risk, because you're going to have a lot of that over the next 10 years.
Is it going to require massive changes to eating habits in places like China in order for us to really get there?
Well, no, actually in China they're pretty high consumers of meat as it is at the moment. People forget about that. It's sort of, they plow through 60 or 70 kilos of meat. Nothing like Canada, where you remorselessly work your way through about 130 if you put in fish, etc. I don't think that's sustainable, by the way. So clearly things are going to happen in China. Clearly meat consumption is going to increase, but let's remember, in history they've been great pork eaters. Also, they prefer fish and they prefer chicken. Yes, they'll eat beef, but that's at the margin. It's always going to be a sort of special meat. But then perhaps that's all it has to be, because Charlie Gracie was talking today about Canada producing an extra, 1 million tons additional, let's say, of beef. Well, actually, if 1.3 billion Chinese elect to eat 1 kg per capita more of beef, unlikely they might be, then that's 1.3 million tons gone. Yeah. So, I mean, clearly there's great potential, but don't take it for granted. And also understand, Charlie was saying, understand the consumer. Chinese and Asians in general are not so meat-centric as we are. I mean, what do we do in Canada? We start for a meal, you plop a great big piece of meat on a plate and then sort of dot stuff around to make it look decent. Well, they don't do that in Asia. They're not meat-centric. Actually, they're vegetable-centric. If I sit down with Chinese friends or with my translators' parents, when I'm often in China, there'll be 10 dishes on the table. a little bit of this, a little bit of that. 6 of them will be vegetable based. There'll be at least 1 chicken, there'll be at least 1 fish. You know, if they're going to have beef, that would be very special. So, you know, don't let us go overboard. What for certain isn't going to happen is that when that Chinese family in Nanjing, when their household income dots over 5,000 Canadian dollars per household, they don't wake up one morning and say, "Funny, I fancy a ribeye steak." You know, it doesn't work like that. And so, you know, get to know about their food culture, their food heritage. And that's the challenge. But in the end, I mean, the final word is, you finish the sentence of a Chinese consumer who's in a shop and looking in a butcher and is looking at beef, picks up a piece of beef, and she is saying, "I'm willing to pay more than double the price for this portion of beef than I have to pay for this pork, because..." Finish the sentence. She's got to have good reason to do that. Does it taste better? Is it more consistent in quality? Does she trust its supply chain integrity? Has it got a better story? What about the provenance? There's got to be good reason. Consumers aren't stupid. They will pay more for more, but that's up for us to find out what is that more.
Yeah, and are we making inroads there? Are we getting closer to being able to tell that story a little bit better?
No, I think in general people just sort of scop it between the legs and hoy it across to China and hope it disappears. We've got to do a lot better than that.